So Matt, today we're going to be talking about agents to wrap up the conference, and a really interesting topic: agent experience.
Yeah.
What is agent experience to you?
Well, I mean that's what I'm going to be talking a lot about, right? Like, but the agent experience or AX is really um I coined that term during a talk with one of our principal engineers, just because we were talking about like we were starting to build more and more around coding agents integrating in with Netlify and building and deploying on Netlify, right? Like, and we were seeing, looking into some of the flows and seeing some of the things that worked and didn't work so well, right? Like, and suddenly just like on that call said the words like, yeah, we got to, as we start building our features, we really got to start thinking about the agent experience of them. And then it sort of dawned on me that like that's actually like a pretty broad concern, like this idea of AX or agent experience. So what does it mean to build products that are not just used by other human beings, but that are also used by agents and through agents?
Awesome. Well, Matt, I'm intrigued to learn more, so I'll bring your slides up on stage, and
Thank
I'll
you.
pass the mic over to you. So Matt, take it away.
Thank you, Simon. Um, great to see you all. Hope you've had an amazing conference so far. Thanks for having me here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Netlify. We're a web deployment platform. Been around for about 10 years now, with the vision of helping to build a better web and enable the world's developers to create and unlock the power of the web. And before I get to agent experience, I want to just think back to like when I started building applications and building software. Back then, Don Norman and a fellow countryman from Denmark, Jacob Nielsen, coined the term user experience or UX, with the definition of being all aspect of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its product. And obviously, user experience turned out to be incredibly important to building software, right? Like, we started realizing that software is just not just a list of features. It's also something you interact with, built by a company, often with a community around it. One of my favorite articles about it back in the day was this one about why you only need to test with 5 users, and just this realization that if you really get down to the human level and you're building a new product and you get like 5 people to just sit down and use it without telling them how they should use it, you often get this kind of experience where it turns out to be surprisingly difficult to approach your software. You think everything is logical and obvious, but that's rarely the case for a completely new user coming to it. And it turned out back in the day that UX could be a massive differentiator from one product to the competing products, right? Originally, maybe we thought about products as mainly just like, can they do a job or not? Do they have the features? And it turned out that how they do that job and how it feels like to use them, how low the friction gets as a user adopting a new product, was really crucial in winning the market. Then when I started Netlify and we launched 10 years ago, we had this mission of unlocking the power of the web for in many ways for a new group of developers. At the time, a front-end developer was often seen as someone that would take a Photoshop file and slice it up and then hand it over to a real developer that would implement it in a backend. And we had this vision of a different kind of web architecture where we would build everything with native web technologies, and where the front-end developer would be the main developer. And my thesis back then was that developer experience, this holistic interface with our company, with our product, with our community, would be what would differentiate a platform like ours from our competitors. in that we had to build the best holistic experience around pushing your ideas to the web to really get this new way of building for the web to take off, to help front-end developers just become web developers, and to differentiate in the market, and again to really live up to both these pieces of the foundation of our company, right? Like enabling the world's developers to create and unlock the power of the web, and to actually build a better web. And developer experience is really defined again as the holistic experience a developer have when building on a platform. It's not just the technology or the list of features. It's the onboarding, how intuitive and frictionless is it. It's the documentation plays a big role in understanding a software platform for a developer. The brand is relevant. The software libraries and SDKs and CLI tooling that you make available to sort of integrate with a developer's native environment. And if you want to build great developer experience, again, it's not like a set of features that makes a great DX. It's really an obsession over the developer as a core persona that you constantly think about as you're building your product. And then at the start of 2023, as AI started to sort of really be a massive market trend, and we defined our AI strategy, one piece that I started talking about internally was like, what do we need to do to become the preferred deployment platform for AI? And I got to be honest and say that in the start of 23, when I said that, it felt like, okay, this is a very long-term thing. This is probably more something that's going to be relevant by the end of the decade than right around the corner. And boy, was I wrong, right? Like the ability for agents to write code has accelerated incredibly fast, and this became really relevant really fast. So at the start of this year, I published an article called Introducing AX, Why Agent Experience Matters, that really was part of recentering Netlify on the idea of agent experience, on the idea that we now have in many ways a new class of users that are agents building and deploying on top of our product, or users building and deploying on Netlify through agents. And just like with user experience, if you start actually like really taking your product and you just give them your CLI tool and some APIs, and you start asking it to use it, often you get a similar effect just with an agent instead of a user hallucinating non-existing features, trying to go for API calls that doesn't necessarily do what they think. And it quickly became visible to me that like agent experience is a whole new discipline, an incredibly important discipline. So what is agent experience? Again, agent AX is the holistic experience an AI agent will have as the user of a product or platform. I'll talk to a lot more of the practical patterns that we've been using as we've been building out the agent experience for Netlify, and how we think about agent experience in general. Part of it is simply making platforms or products available to agents. Now, every web app is somewhat available to an agent, right? Like you can spin up Operator from ChatGPT, or you can spin up compute use from Claude, and be able to do stuff with a web app, whether the web app wants to or not. But it also seems logical that like simulating human users through a virtual browser and screenshots fed into a multimodal agent can't be the best experience for an agent. And agents will be collaborators at the intersection of humans and products. So I started driving my team towards obsessing over the agent as a core persona, as a core user of Netlify, with the thesis that within the next couple of years, anyone that is not building a great agent experience is not going to be able to build a great developer experience either. And with the thesis that agent experience is going to be a part of differentiating products and platforms from their competitors. Which product is the agents preferring? Which product works best with the agent of choice for any of your users? That's going to be a key part in building successful products in the future. When we think of AX from the perspective of Netlify, we think about Netlify's own AX. How are we building Netlify to be easy for agents to consume and build on and deploy on? There's what we call customer AX. That's the other side of it, right? Like every single company that uses Netlify as a platform to build products on, or build websites on, or build e-commerce on, are probably also in the future going to have to think about the agent experience of the products they build. And we're in this interesting position to help them do that. And then we're thinking of the broader industry AX that I'll talk more about, where as an industry, we kind of all have to work together to start building standards and conventions for how agents interact with all of our products. Let's start with Netlify's own AX and what we've done there. In some ways, our journey started already back in May 23, just about 2 years ago now, when OpenAI launched the GPT store for ChatGPT. Back then, we built a custom GPT called Netlify's Website Deployer. And it used a flow that we had built early on in Netlify, but that we then really tailored specifically to these agents, where within the ChatGPT universe, as soon as you have discovered this GPT, you can just mention Netlify and say, deploy this thing on a URL, and ChatGPT will instantly deploy and give you back a URL without any friction, no sign up, no authorization, nothing like that. Just the agent doing a deploy on your behalf and giving you a URL you can share with the world. And then it would also give you a claim link. So if you wanted to keep that URL around for more than a couple of hours, you could go follow that link, claim the site, and add it to your Netlify account. And we sort of just gradually discovered after a while that suddenly we were seeing we were seeing more than 1,000 sites created every single day just from the ChatGPT ecosystem. And then we started expanding this and writing guides and tutorials for agents to build on top of Netlify and use similar claims flow, whether they were deploying through GitHub repositories or directly to Netlify. And at the end of last year, we saw like the launches of Bold, and actually Bold and Lovable launched kind of at the same time, and to me really pushed the barrier for what agents could do to the next level, and suddenly like propelled us from a world where it was very much prototyping space or small ephemeral apps to a space where it became obvious that okay, now probably these agents are starting to be the natural starting point for a new project. Even if you take the code they initially set up and start working with it somewhere else, it started being clear that it was just like an incredibly fast way to get a new product going. And it also became really visible that agents would start working much better for coding websites much faster than I had initially thought. Bold is fully integrated with Netlify, as Simon mentioned. So if you build a product and hit deploy, that deploy directly flows to Netlify. It uses this claim flow where there's no friction on the behalf of the user. There's no need to first sign up and then go back to Bold and ask it to do things. Bold can just start deploying. And about a month ago, Windsurf launched a similar partnership where if you're working on a Windsurf project and it's any kind of web project, you can really just tell Windsurf, deploy this. It'll deploy it. You'll get a URL on windsurf.build. You can share it or use it, or you can go claim it if you want to keep it around longer. Again, same completely frictionless onboarding for an agent doing work on behalf of a user. And today we have many more partners like same.dev or Alpha, Refine, and several others that are picking up these workflows and using our platform in a way where the agent is really in the driver's seat, to the point where today we're seeing about 10,000 sites created directly from coding agents every single day on Netlify. It's pretty wild to experience. And on my end, I've centered my whole product team around AX as the North Star for our product experience. Just like developer experience in the first 10 years of Netlify was really the key part to reducing the friction for a new developer coming in and working on our product. I now have full conviction that if we don't lead the space in the agent experience and in how simple and how frictionless it is to use Netlify with code agents, we'll not be able to deliver on the best developer experience in the world. So what does this mean in practice? Agent experience typically involves levels of authentication, onboarding flows, and maybe model context protocol systems, right? Like, this is the core question of like, how can agents actually interact with your system? Of course, if your product doesn't have an API, if it doesn't have tooling for agents, if it doesn't have an MCP, it's going to be very hard for agents to actually interact with your products. And most projects on a platform like ours now starts with an agent on behalf of a human. So there's always a human in the loop, but it's typically the agent instigating the first deploy and the first motion. OAuth is becoming an important standard here, also in MCP, but I think it's often still too much friction if you constantly have to OAuth with a bunch of tools before the agent can do anything on your behalf. So we'll look at more patterns around that. And with MCP, it's also pretty obvious that while MCP is sort of the first winner at the whole standards layer, the authorization story there is still pretty rough and pretty unclear. Docs and context files become incredibly important. LLMs are not humans. They're like a very weird type of developer that on the one hand has read everything on the internet, and on the other hand, they might be trying to use your product without actually having looked at the latest version of your docs. So there's this weird intersection between knowing very broad a lot of stuff and very deep a lot of stuff, but they might not actually like be looking at your current documentation. They might be trying to build on your product using an outdated tutorial from some random place on the internet instead of just looking on what your docs says. So patterns for getting simple versions of your docs into the context of the LLM as it's working with your product becomes incredibly important. And there's still not a lot of real standards outside of cursor rules, LLMs.txt, and MCP. And again, when you're building a platform, LLMs are not humans. Good DX might not be good AX. One of my favorite examples here is just like the fact that LLMs works much better with XML than with JSON. And it's for the simple reason that if you output XML, you don't have to escape as many quotes and stuff as when you output JSON. But it's like this weird unpredictable change in like what's actually the best format for an LLM versus what have history shown that developers prefer. Another example of good DX not being AX, this was a really interesting Twitter thread from Marcelo Torreiro at Brex that talked about how they actually kind of re-architected their front-end architecture to be more LLM friendly. They removed all the custom hooks within their code base because those abstracted away what was happening from the model. They started making all data fetching use Relay, a GraphQL framework that sort of really lets you define the data dependencies directly in the components. And Relay often has like Relay in the market for developers have kind of not really won out because it was just like too hard to adopt. But it turns out that if an agent understands how it works and you put it in place, it can be really effective in letting LLMs one-shot whole functionalities because the context is simpler to reason about. APIs are often not enough. APIs are good, but if you just give an agent an open API spec without anything else, it'll probably perform worse at using their product than if you give it something like compute use or operator that goes all the way through the user interface. So it's obvious that we need something else in between. And MCP is kind of emerging as the first good standard for that. Model context protocol, you probably all heard about. It's hard to say how many are sort of deeply familiar with it now, but it really standardizes how applications can give context to LLMs. Again, the question when an LLM uses your product is often like this question of like, how do you actually get the right context in front of it? If you wanted to use your API, it becomes a question of like, how do you direct context? How can an API call direct another API call after it's done? How can you tie stateful flows together and so on? And agent experience through all these veins are having remarkable effects of companies' ability to differentiate, right? Like one question we often get in a world of AI native tooling and vibe coding and so on is like, what's going to happen to the developers? Again, as we build for agents and as we optimize Netlify for agents, my thesis is that we are optimizing for the next 100 million developers and for many more developers, that these tools will lower the barrier to what it means to be a developer, and that we'll see lots more developers enter the market, that we'll see a lot of developers work indirectly with code instead of code, but that what they're doing is still software development. And I can tell you that we are seeing very similar charts on our end as Paul is seeing from Supabase. But it's fun to think about, right? Like that these tools that some people think about as like taking over the role of developer is actually like massively driving exponential new levels of signups for a database company. Like there's literally not much tooling in the world out there that's more developer centric than a database company. We're seeing across the ecosystem, companies start adopting flows that are similar to our deploy then claim flow that really lowers the barrier for an agent to initiate working with your product before you have an actual user using your product. This is an example for NeonDB. Prisma has launched a similar like deploy then claim flow. And I think we'll see that becoming more and more as a standard, as often it becomes an agent that makes the choice of the initial tool set rather than a human doing that directly. At Netlify, we then also think about customer AX in the terms of like, one thing is what are we building that makes Netlify a better platform for agents to use and a better platform to use with agents. Our customers are obviously having a lot of the same needs. And we just launched 2 weeks ago the ability for to build MCP servers with Netlify. Again, model context protocol is still early in the terms of like, it has rough edges, but it's also very clearly emerging as like one of the preferred choices for getting agents access to your project. I played around with it, vibe coded an MCP server on my personal blog. You can check out the story about it. But it's one of these examples of how all of these things plays together, right? Like, so I was actually able to completely one-shot an MCP server for my site just by using the prompt. Use the guide here and a link to our guide on Netlify to add a Netlify function with an example MCP server. Just giving that one prompt to Windsurf gave me a fully working MCP server, and then one follow-up prompt to saying like, implement these two features, these two tools, immediately set up an actual usable MCP server on my own blog. Then I added a third tool that's like a fun story in terms of agent experience, an agent net promoter score tool. And my personal MCP, it really has two tools, right? Like, so in MCP, you have a client, you set up Cursor or Windsurf or Claude chat, and you tell it like, here's an MCP server you can use. The agent will then discover what different tools there are and try to use them when there's relevant actions. And the first functionalities I added was just like list the articles on my blog and get a specific article on my blog. But then I added a third tool that's like, leave feedback in an agent net promoter score survey, and tell as an agent, how happy are you with this MCP server, and kind of nudged agent into doing this. So when they use one of the other tools, they are inclined to leave feedback. And I currently have an agent net promoter score of 50. So far, both Claude and GPT-4 are pretty happy with my MCP server. The other feature we've gotten a lot of requests from is just blocking AI bots and controlling crawlers. Agentic tooling does tend to access the web in patterns that are not always very desirable for people that have websites, web stores, or web apps. And it's pretty clear that we need open standards and industry calibration for AX for the web itself. How should agents approach websites and web apps? And that leads me to the third point that we're working on in Netlify. That's really the industry AX, open standards for how agents can use our products in ways that align with how we want them to use them. So if we see typical processes for human plus agent working with sites today, we start seeing like tons of scrapings and unneeded requests going on. If we can optimize our projects for agents, we can get much more in control of the amount of traffic agents drive and resources they use. And we can start really thinking through how tool use can be exposed, not just through individual MCP servers, but through the web, how we can think through better granular access patterns than current OAuth standards allows for. How can we give permissions to gated content to agents in ways where we can monetize, and how can we expose our own agents for other agents to interact with. If you're interested in participating in this discussion, we set up a community site, agentexperience.ax, where we're trying to drive discussions on how to build these shared standards and collaborate across the industry. And I invite you all to participate there, or read up on what Netlify is generally doing in the AX space. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Very, very interesting. And Maybe we can take one question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, we have. There's a ton of questions, to be honest, but I'm going to pick one. The question I'd love to hear is from this side, from this point of view, from the human aspect. What do you feel like the biggest mental blocker is for us as people to adapt to using agent experience, like, you know, in products today?
I think it's a lot about building a new discipline, right? Like we spend a lot of time, like even now it's often hard to be best in class at UX and DX, right? Like because it's a hard discipline. It requires you to build real empathy and to sit down and look at real users of your product, right? Like, and in a similar way, we now have like this new layer that interacts with our products on behalf of a user, right? Like, so we start both having to figure out like what are the user's objectives and what kind of agents are they trying to approach our product with in the first place, right? Like, and then putting ourselves in those shoes. For as developers, for example, we often, as experienced developers, we've often built a lot of habits around what it actually means to be a developer and what it means to work with code and to do software development that might start really shifting once we think about AI native software development, where code is often sort of a secondary artifact. I definitely experienced that in the beginning as I first started trying some of these tools, right? Like the whole approach to fully understanding a system in my head and then building a solution to it versus the sort of more probabilistic interactions with an agent, where sometimes it almost feels like you're arguing with someone on how to do things, right? And as we're building products for developers, remembering like that these new patterns are emerging and that people are still navigating that space, that's definitely like one of the really interesting challenges that sort of sits in the space between like understanding humans, understanding LLMs, and building the right kind of product experience.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much. Great session. And yeah, for those, in fact, I'll bring it back on stage quickly. For those wanting to learn more about agent experience, netlify.com/AX. Thanks, Matt, and thanks for supporting the conference and giving us a wonderful closing keynote.
Thanks for having me.